Hello, and welcome to our video looking at World War II from the European history perspective. We'll start by looking at the causes of World War II, then how the fighting played out across different fronts, the horrors of the Holocaust, and then the negotiations that shaped the post war world and led us directly into the Cold War. Let's begin with our causes. One of the biggest causes leading up to World War II is this policy of appeasement. So, Britain and France, still recovering from World War I, are going to allow Hitler to break the Treaty of Versailles by rebuilding Germany's military. He builds tanks, he creates an air force, and even reinstates the draft. And instead of stopping him, the Western democracies kind of turn a blind eye, hoping to avoid another war. And so they allow him just to continue this behavior. And Hitler's going to start testing out the waters to see what he can get away with. So he starts by marching German troops into the Rhineland, which is a demilitarized zone meant to act as a buffer between Germany and France. And it's a clear violation of the Treaty of Versailles. But again, Britain and France, they don't act. They basically say like, oh, well, maybe, if we don't do anything, he'll just do that and that's it. But this lack of response only encourages more aggression. Meanwhile, while all that's going on, Mussolini is invading Ethiopia. So, though the League of Nations condemns the action, they actually can't stop it. Nobody's willing to put forth any kind of military control to stop Mussolini from doing this. And what happens is it shows that the League of Nations is really pretty weak and won't step up to take action against aggression. In 1938, Hitler annexes Austria after a public vote showed widespread support for that. Then he moves into the Sudetenland, which is a German speaking region of Czechoslovakia. And this kind of just brings all of the Germanic people under his control and his rule. And it emboldens Hitler to keep moving forward. Then, in 1939, Hitler and Stalin shocked the world by signing the Nazi Soviet non aggression pact. They basically agree not to attack each other and secretly plan to divide up Poland between the two of them. And this gives Hitler the green light to launch his invasion of Poland without the fear of the Soviets resisting that action. And the invasion of Poland is really seen as the initial catalyst of World War II. So now let's get on to the fighting of World War II. These are the breakdown of sides. So you've got the Allied powers, which will be France, Great Britain, the Soviet Union, and the United States come later, and then the Axis powers of Germany, Italy, and Japan. On September 1st, 1939, Germany invades Poland, and this is the official start of World War II. True to their word, Britain and France declare war on Germany, and then within weeks, the Soviets invaded from the east, and Poland is officially divided. The German military is going to use this new war tactic called the Blitzkrieg or lightning war that they started testing out during the Spanish Civil War. It involves fast moving tanks, some motorized infantry, and aerial bombing that overwhelm targets before they can respond. And this terrifying new form of warfare proves really devastating across Europe, specifically in France and in London. In 1940, Germany invades France and quickly defeats it. It's there that the leader signs an armistice, creating a puppet government in southern France. Meanwhile, Charles de Gaulle, who's kind of like the head of the military that got away, he leads the Free French forces from exile. And inside France, the resistance is formed. Basically, it's this group that is trying to sabotage German operations and provide intelligence for the Allies. So here's a map of Europe looking at May of 1941, and it looks pretty bleak for the Allies. You can see pretty much all of Western and Central Europe is taken over, and only Britain really remains a true free state, and they're greatly under siege. Next, we'll dive into some of the more specific battles going on during World War II. One of the biggest ones is going to be the Battle of Britain. So, this is where Hitler launches an aerial attack on Britain in 1940, hoping to bomb them into surrendering. But Britain's Royal Air Force, or the RAF, they have radar, and that helps them figure out when they're coming, get people underground, all of that stuff. And though many civilians die in the bombings, Germany fails to gain that air superiority and never launched a full invasion of Britain. Um, you can see the Keep Calm Carry On poster, that's really common during this time. And the children one, that's talking about how children were sent to the countryside during this time period because they didn't want them to stay in these cities that were getting constantly bombed. One of the biggest turning points during this war happens with Operation Barbarossa. So, despite their pact, Hitler invades the Soviet Union in June 1941. Turns out, he can't be trusted to keep agreements. He wants natural resources and more living space. He says the Germans need that. So the Soviets are going to fight back with these massive numbers, and they use what's called scorch earth policy, which basically just means that they like burn everything before they leave a city, so that the Nazis can't have anything that they had in those cities. And also, the Nazis get stuck there in the Russian winter, which of course everybody knows don't get stuck in Russia during the winter. And this is one of the bloodiest fronts of the war. Then the next major thing happens, and that happens on December 7th, 1941, when Japan bombs Pearl Harbor, bringing the United States into the war. And days later, Germany also declares war on the United States, and this marks a major turning point. Now the Allies could go on the offensive globally because the US is going to bring in a lot of the resources and manpower that Britain and France just don't have anymore. Germany had seized control of North Africa to control the vital shipping lanes and all the oil coming out of those areas, and the Allies face off against him and began pushing the Axis forces out. So the Northern African campaign gave the Allies a kind of launch point into Southern Europe. They're going to use that as their base, and then they're going to try to start invading Italy. Within months of the Allies invading Italy, Mussolini is able to be overthrown and he's eventually killed by Italian partisans who, like his own citizens who had been part of the resistance movement. And this gives the Allies new airfields to be able to strike Germany at closer range, and it forces the Axis to fight on multiple fronts. Which is one of the reasons that Germany lost World War One, is that two front warfare style was too hard to maintain. But the true kind of turn of the tide happens in 1944 on June 6th when the Allies launch D-Day, and it's the largest kind of water-based invasion in history. So over 150,000 troops are going to storm the beaches of Normandy in France, and this opens up the Western Front against Germany and begins the liberation of all of Nazi-occupied Europe. Like they just basically keep pushing them out of every region they've occupied. From Normandy, they keep pushing further into Central Europe. And as they push eastward, they're liberating towns and really weakening German defenses as they go. And the final major German offensive is called the Battle of the Bulge, and it fails. So this really marks the end of Hitler's regime. That was kind of like his last stand. And then in April of 1945, Allied troops are going to close in all around Berlin, and Hitler, he commits suicide during that time period. And it's not too long after that happens that Germany officially surrenders on May 7th, and then the very next day, May 8th, is known as VE Day, Victory in Europe Day. It's the official end of the war in Europe. Now, while Europe's celebrating the end of the war within the Pacific is still going on. In August of 1945, that's when the US will kind of officially end that. They drop two atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and Japan surrenders in September, officially ending World War II. Now, one of the things that makes World War II a little different from other kind of large scale conflicts that we've looked at is it's not just a war about territory, it's also a war about ideology. And the Holocaust is really Hitler's plan to exterminate Europe's Jews. And so we need to talk about what that looked like and the impacts it had. Now, if you recall, one of the tenets of fascism is really this idea that it's us against them, and you name a common enemy. And so, what Hitler did is he named a common enemy of the Jewish people. There was a lot of prejudice against them already, and he started to organize programs around 1938 that led to violence against the Jews. That's where we see Kristallnacht, like the Night of Broken Glass. The Jewish people are routed up and arrested. They're put into ghettos or shipped off to concentration camps, and really not much is done to protect Jewish people living throughout Europe because the discrimination against them was just so rampant in everyday life. They had historically been a very unpopular group in Europe. And as we know, Hitler's final solution to this problem was really to get rid of them, to exterminate that entire, race of people. So this leads to the death of almost 6 million Jews. Now, it's not just Jewish people that are dying from the Holocaust, like in these concentration camps. It's also like Roma people, like gypsies, disabled people, and political prisoners. So when Allied forces they liberate these camps, they're really horrified by what they found. I think there was definitely ideas about what was going on. Like they knew that the Jewish people were being sent to these places. I think they just did not expect the horrors that they actually saw there. Okay, moving on to our last segment, which is about negotiations and kind of what's decided at the end of World War II. Now, first up is the Yalta Conference, and that's where the big three meet. So that's going to be Stalin, Roosevelt, and Churchill. And they talk about what they want to do after the war is over, because obviously what they did the first time around did not work. And so they decide to divide Germany up into different zones that they'll each be responsible for patrolling. They decide that Eastern European countries will be liberated from Germany and they'll be able to hold free elections. Germany would still have to pay small reparations, but nothing like World War One. And then they agree that there should be war tribunals to try the criminals, especially of the Nazi party, for all the atrocities they committed during the war. So then at the end of the war, the big three meet again and they meet in Potsdam, which is this little city kind of right outside of Germany, or not Germany, Berlin. Uh, and most of what they said at the Yalta conference is still solidified. They're like, yep, sounds good, divide up Berlin, all that stuff. But one of the big differences that we see is that the Soviets already are beginning to refuse free elections in Eastern Europe, and they are trying to make those territories satellite states of the Soviet Union. And that's what's going to help set the stage for the upcoming Cold War. World War II, it really reshaped Europe. It toppled fascist regimes, it exposed the horrors of genocide, and it's going to launch the Cold War, which is what we're going to dive into next. So, on balance, I mean, it was really impactful, not just for the world, but Europe in general. So, thanks for watching.